Sunita, welcome to Singapore. I think Sunita needs no introduction, but I think we should say something about her lifetime's work. I think it's the first time I've actually had the pleasure of meeting such a pioneer of restoration in India. And as you know, she's been awarded Padma Shri by the President of India for her work in saving India's heritage. I think this is the real hero of Heritage on Stage today, Sunita. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I think we are here for two things. The first is the launch of the Lucknow Cookbook, which just crossed its first anniversary at the end of January in India. And within this year, it has been launched at most of the premier literary festivals across the country and has been recipient of accolades across the print and electronic media. It's been praised as compelling reading and so much more than a cookbook. I've been devouring it in the past 2 hours at home, and really I had to stop myself to get here on time. A question that many may have would be, why should a cookbook of everyday recipes from Lucknow have found such resonance amongst readers? To answer this question, I would like to quote from S. Prasanarajan, editor of Open Magazine, from his review of the book. Speaking of the cookbook, he says, "This is a cookbook as a cultural testament by one of India's most accomplished aesthetes. Every recipe in this book tells a story that's more than culinary. It takes us to the private kitchen of our heritage, lest we forget the range and richness of the taste of the subcontinent. Marinated in ancestral memories, the Lucknow Cookbook draws its ingredients from the cultural history of a different time. Never before has tradition been presented more tastefully." The editor is talking here, of course, more than just the recipes of the cookbook. He's alluding to the intangible cultural heritage of cooking and heirloom recipes that forms the basis of all our communities and societies in India. Your profession in the past 50 years has been in the interior design and architecture restoration, and you've done many celebrated buildings and several hotels. A long list of distinguished projects which I hope to one day see in person in India. So, could you share with us how you decided to co-author the Lucknow Cookbook, and also may we have the pleasure of you reading a short passage from this book co-created with your mother, Chan Sir, and perhaps also talk about one recipe or two from the Silk Road. Sunita, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for that very gracious introduction. So first I'll read a note from the book. And this book came about because my mother is a very well-known cookbook author. And she had written her second book, but the book had fallen through with the publisher because the commissioning editor died. And I'm doing 2 books with this publisher, 2 more books. But I was very keen that my mother's cookbook is published before mine. So I approached David Devidar of Aleph, and he said, "We don't do cookbooks." But he said, "Let me speak to you about it tomorrow," the following day. So he did call me, and he said that we will do your mother's cookbook on the condition that you co-author the recipes and you write a 10,000-word introduction and a note about the book. So I thought, how much easier can this be? After all, the subject I've studied is literature, and 10,000 words is not really that much. It's not a book. And famous last words, because it took me 12 weeks of writing 10 hours a day to complete this book. And in between, my mother, who had contributed 345 recipes, out of which, and the publishers only required 150, she decided to pull out another 1,000 recipes without exaggeration. So that is the genesis of this book. And David asked me, I had written the introduction, but he said, "I want you to write a note about the book." So I'll read out just a few paragraphs from the note about the book. Lucknow has always been a city of refinement, and its cuisine reflects these sensibilities. In many ways, Lucknow was considered the cultural capital of North India. It was here that the Urdu language was developed to near perfection. Art and architecture, particularly Indo-Saracenic architecture, flourished in the city built along the banks of the river Gomti. Architectural heritage is history written in stone. This is true of the many fine buildings that still exist in the city. But most importantly, Lucknow was and still is a city known for its composite culture, its Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb. The quintessence of this culture was an amalgamation of the finest of Hindu and Muslim thoughts and their mutual acceptance. This composite culture of plurality and complexity was also reflected in the easy acceptance of the varied cuisines of the various communities that resided in Lucknow. The culture of Lucknow, which my parents encountered in the late 1940s, was undoubtedly Muslim. But Lucknow was also home to communities of Hindus, Brahmins, Kshatriyas, and Kais, along with British residents who had stayed on post-1947, as well as Anglo-Indians, Christians, Parsis, and Bengalis. They had for generations resided in Lucknow. Sindhis and Punjabis were rather late entrants. And here I must say that even though I carry a Punjabi surname, my mother is a Hindu Balochi from Quetta. My father is a Rajput from around Jaisalmer. But for 4 generations, they had lived in Lahore, so he considered himself a Lahori. So each of these communities had its own food preferences and many different methods of cooking. The samosa, in its present form, was invented in Lucknow. Today, it has become ubiquitous and is found the world over. Chaat also, which is a very particular Indian savory street food. Chaat also originated in Lucknow, and Lucknow also has its own distinctive biryanis and pulaus, both non-vegetarian and vegetarian. It introduced the dampuk style of cooking. Lucknow's cuisine was influenced by the cuisines that traveled down the Silk Road from Turkey, Persia, Afghanistan, and then down to Quetta and Lahore, eventually finding their way to Lucknow. Many of the recipes in this cookbook are distilled from this rich culinary heritage. And I end by saying that David Lowenthal, the American historian, renowned for his work on heritage and spatial concepts of the past and the future, had famously pronounced that the past is a foreign country. This cookbook, although palpable with nostalgia, selectively recaptures events and objects from the past that are a part of the intangible heritage of food and familial memories of gentler times. These are collective memories that conserve a sense of continuity, of belonging, and of being rooted. I believe food engenders social and family harmony. It anchors us and connects us to the past, grounds us in the present, and gives us a sense of identity and belonging. Our personal histories define us, and I have chosen to define this partly through Lucknow's food traditions. The preparation of food is learnt by observation. It is a process of osmosis. In our family, all 4 generations are reasonably good cooks. This book documents the recipes that we have learned from my mother and from our many friends in Lucknow. As one of them is seated here, from my school friend, Beena Yog. One can certainly cook from this book, but one can also read through the recipes to get a glimpse of Lucknowi culture and of the lives behind these recipes. This is a book for cooks and for armchair cooks, because for people who really love food, it is a lens through which to view this particular world. Thank you.
Thank you. And may we now have the pleasure of inviting Manisa and Preeti on stage for the launch of the book in Singapore. Manisa, please. Preeti, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let's hold it up.
Thank you.
Available outside. I've been trying to get my hands on it, so you're lucky today. So, Sunita, let's move on to the topic of design and its relation to heritage, which has been your life's work. From an ancient land, you are now in a comparatively young and multicultural city that's working towards our own distinctive design culture. It has been observed that a firm understanding of your own culture and history and heritage is key to developing a distinctive culture and design approach for the future. So in your work across India, you have really absorbed the breadth and depth of what your country has created in the past millennia. So may I now invite you to really share your presentation with us and some thoughts of what you have learned. So over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll stand and do this because then I can look better at the slides. This is the topic today. It's a vast topic because we are talking about tangible, intangible. So what I've chosen to do is, and I cannot do it like a brief history of time. I'm not a Hawking, and neither can I say that the theory of everything. So I thought maybe perhaps like a historian called Ed West, who wrote 1066 and Everything Before, a very, very brief history of England. So I will speak about, I'll speak very, very briefly about everything that came before 2019. And they say India lives in many centuries simultaneously. So I will go through several centuries, but I will be what we call a sutradhar, a storyteller. So I hope to connect some dots. And before we start, I thought that it is very important that I just give you a genesis of from where India came, and the geography that genesis created, because the history of India is really from its geography. So this land mass, as you all know, which was called Gondwana land, this proto-continent that lay idling in the primeval sea, about 700 million years ago, it started to break up. And a triangular chunk broke away and tilted slightly anti-clockwise and began a 40-million-year-old journey until it docked into the underbelly of the Asiatic continent. And then it kept pushing, and that is what created the Himalayas. And the Himalayas are still rising because they're the youngest mountain chain in the world and the highest, but they rise a couple of inches every single year. So the Himalayas were rising, and then when the snows and the streams started bringing down with alluvial soil into this marshy land, which was the Indo-Gangetic Plain, which would be here. This would be the Indo-Gangetic Plain, where you see the Yam